Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Please welcome the President and CEO of WFAE, Joe O'Connor.
Thank you, Jeff Bundy. A huge thank you for everyone who is attending this important and timely conversation on race and reconciliation, especially in the light of the events of last year, even the last month, one could even say with today's beginning of the second impeachment of President Trump. Of course, we thank you for attending. We thank all of our panelists and our host, Mary C. Curtis, but particularly all of our contributing members who make everything at WFAE possible. You too can contribute to the conversation tonight by submitting questions to the Q&A button, not the chat button, which is located in your Zoom toolbar. Again, the Q&A button, not the chat button. And now a word about our extraordinary host, and I'm proud to say my friend. Mary C. Curtis is a columnist at Roll Call, an award-winning journalist and educator based in Charlotte and Washington. She is host of the CQ Roll Call podcast, Equal Time with Mary C. Curtis. She's contributed to NBC News, NPR, The Washington Post, The Root, ESPN's The Undefeated, and talks politics on WCCB TV, and of course, here on WFAE in Charlotte. Mary has worked at the New York Times, the Charlotte Observer, the Baltimore Sun, and the Associated Press, and was national correspondent for AOL's Politics Daily. Her coverage specialty is the intersection of politics, culture, and race, and she's covered the 2008, 2012, 2016, and 2020 presidential campaigns. Mary is a senior leader with the Op-Ed Project, facilitating Right to Change the World seminars at Yale University, Cornell University, and the Ford Foundation, and at the Aspen New Voices Fellowship in Johannesburg, South Africa. Mary, a summa cum laude graduate of Fordham University, was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University and a Kiplinger Fellow in social media at Ohio State. Mary was chosen to be included in the History Makers, the single largest archival collection of its kind in the world, designed to promote and celebrate the successes to document movements, events, and organizations that are important to the African American community and to American society. It is available digitally and permanently archived in the Library of Congress. Her honors include Clarion Awards from the Association for Women in Communications, awards from the National Headliners and the Society of Professional Journalists, 3 first-place awards from the National Association of Black Journalists, 2 first-place Society for Professional Journalists DC Dateline Awards, and the Thomas Wolfe Award for an examination of Confederate heritage groups. Mary has contributed to several books, including an essay in the book, Love Her, Love Her Not, The Hillary Paradox. You can find her work at maryccurtis.com. It is my honor and delight to introduce my friend, Mary C. Curtis. Mary?
Well, thank you so much for that, Joe. Thank you so much. Well, I'm Mary C. Curtis, and I want to thank you all for joining us for this very important WFAE special, Race and Reconciliation, a conversation about Frederick Murphy's The Other Side of the Coin. As Joe said, it could not be more relevant. Now, this documentary shares the stories of race in America from a variety of viewpoints through several generations and across hundreds of years of history. It asks the question, and it's a question that's on everybody's mind right now: how do we heal for the sake of future generations? We're going to start off by playing a clip from the film.
America, minds of Africa and the Caribbeans and the Europeans and the Asians and Australians. It's not just race, we're all in this together. I say, united minds of the America.
Growing up in the North, when I learned about race, what I learned was there were slaves in America. We had the Civil War, we set them free, hurrah.
Well, you can always point to the legal milestones and the Civil Rights Act and things like that. But then there's the continuation of Jim Crow.
I didn't actively participate in this persecution, but I'm ashamed to say that I didn't actively resist it either.
I've not been in a situation where adults said hateful things to children and encouraged other children to say hateful things. Were it not for Ms. Martha Welch at that school, She was a human white person. She was probably the only human white person I encountered during my 3 years at that school.
We need to move on to things that are happening now and that we can change. So instead of trying to get back the land that was took from us, why don't we just try to improve the way of life on reservations? Why don't we just fix that, where we can live comfortably and stuff like that. We can, just have nice, normal lives. And then as far as other races and people who may be listening, just know we're still here.
When you sit down across from somebody and get to know them on a personal level, that makes all the difference in the world.
So there's people, there always has been though, there always has been people of a different mindset that were willing to help slaves, that were willing to help Africans, Indian, Native Americans, you name it. I mean, there's always been people of different races that had the right heart or mind to change things. And so yeah, we have to unite with those people that are willing to help. Even our brother Malcolm X said the same thing.
This is my Americana, my version of honor, the feeling of you in the sonogram of your first offspring, the offering of a man that's tired of being a genre.
Well, I would like to tell everyone that I have seen the entire documentary and it is just as powerful as those scenes. So I am really honored to welcome the creator of The Other Side of the Coin, Frederick Murphy. He's a Charlottean, a licensed professional counselor, as well as a documentarian. He started the project History Before Us back in 2016 as a way of capturing and preserving history. His first award-winning documentary, The American South as We Know It, explored the lives of African Americans during the Jim Crow era. His latest work, The Other Side of the Coin, spans from the era of slavery all the way to the present day. Hi, Frederick. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is great. Now, in The Other Side of the Coin, we also meet several people who share their stories about race in America. You saw some of them in that clip, and its impact on them and their families. And tonight we're lucky to be joined by some of those participants in the documentary. We have Todd Thomas, who is a two-time Grammy Award-winning artist. He's very well known for his group Arrested Development, as well as for his solo work. And he shares his story of growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the 70s and 80s. Speech, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I have to say, I'm a fan.
Thank you.
Now, the Reverend Ray Mckinnon joins us. He's a Charlotte activist and former minister with a couple of decades of work in our community, particularly dealing with the challenges in providing affordable housing, which we know is still a big problem we're dealing with. And he also works just in basically bringing people together, which, as we know, and so much now, that's probably one of the most difficult jobs of all nowadays. Reverend Mckinnon, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have Susan Marshall with us. Now, she shares her experience in the documentary from the early 60s when she was a college student in Greensboro. Ms. Marshall, thank you. Thank you for being with us. Now, Alvin C. Jacobs Jr. is a well-known photographer here in Charlotte. He's known for much of his work, and he just had a really powerful exhibit at the Harvey B. Gantt Center, Welcome to Brook Hill, from 2019. And he's a featured artist in the Levine Museum of the New South's exhibit, No Justice, No Peace, which K-N-O-W. He was present during the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he shared that experience in the documentary, and he'll be talking about that tonight. Thank you for being here as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And we have Bill Sizemore. He's an author and journalist who shares a story of finding out about his ancestors who were slave owners and how he later met descendants of those enslaved people, including George Sizemore, whom we also meet in the film. They share a lot. Bill Sizemore, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Now, as we go through the conversation, if you have any questions or comments that you want to share with our panelists, if you would please place them in the Zoom Q&A. It's at the bottom of your screen, or should be. And we'll try to get to as many of them as we can throughout the evening. So I will be checking them from time to time. So first, Frederick, I want to turn to you. Why did you want to make this documentary? What was your goal?
You know, it was to check in. You know, we had so many different activities that were rooted in racial unrest. And me being a therapist, I'm seeing so many individuals that are coming to my office, and they're discussing how race has been affected them more so lately than previously in life. And, you know, I think that it was, you know, really historical trauma that has been embedded in their DNA, because majority of the individuals that were coming in my practice are African-American or other people of color. So, you know, it just caused me to say, you know what, I finished with the first film, let me move into my second one. And the second one is going to be based on getting perspectives from individuals from various different generations, various different cultural backgrounds, and asking the question, where are you at right now with this thing called race, right? Which race we know is a construct. And that's what really motivated the work, is to get better understanding, not only from just an inquisitive standpoint, but from a therapist standpoint as well.
Yeah, well, you know, you do mention that. I don't think many people really, when they think of the effects of racism, think about that trauma. Mm-hmm. It really does stay with you. Can you talk about how your work as a psychologist informed the documentary, and how you thought about it and how you presented it?
Yeah, so, you know, when you have different type of projects, you know, you have a bottom line, right? You have an objective that goes along with that. And I really feel that my years of being a therapist really helped me carve out these different questions to get and elicit a certain emotion from the individuals that I sat across, to ask these questions and have them kind of fit in the overall narrative of the theme. Which is, you know, of course, understanding what race was like and how it still affects individuals over a span of their lifetime. Not only their lifetime, but their ancestors' lifetime, their parents' lifetime, or their children's lifetime as well. So I really sought out to get a full comprehensive understanding. And, you know, I can definitely say that the money spent on that master's degree to become a therapist and keeping up with my CEUs and everything to remain licensed, it helped with that. So yeah, it was just a perfect marriage, if you will, to have those two combined together.
Yeah, nice therapy session, you know. Your previous documentary, and from the introduction, folks know that you have a list of documentaries, and it was about Jim Crow, that era in the American South. So how was this current one an outgrowth from that one?
You know, it provided a second perspective. Individuals who were younger, individuals that were non-African American or non-people of color. And, you know, it was intentionally put together to literally see what the other side has to say about some of the same challenges that individuals faced during Jim Crow. And also to hopefully provide a platform for individuals to say something that they may have been thinking about for such a long time, but they may have been nervous of what their friends may say, or what their parents may have said, or how they would be perceived in the community. And I really think that the film, specifically when I screen it in other places, it provides a platform as well as a voice for individuals who've always wanted to speak out and say something about, you know, these different issues, but it took them seeing somebody else on a camera for them to say, you know what, if that person can do it, it must be okay for me to do it as well.
Yeah, they have an example. So who do you hope sees this? What, as a filmmaker, where would it have the most impact? Who do you hope the audience would be?
You know, it's wide open. You know, this is a subject that it's not new, it's not old, it's just everlasting, and it has been. I mean, I've been on this earth for 41 years, and it's always been an issue in some way, shape, or form, whether it's something that I harbored internally by going into a room and recognize that I may be the only African-American person there, only person of color there, or just in multiple different settings. So to be honest with you, any and everybody that has a pair of eyes and can hear, I want them to be exposed to the documentary, and hopefully they learn from it.
Well, you hit so many high points, particularly this being Black History Month. You talk about, you know, that you went to the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, and you interviewed Mr. Jacobs, who's here, about Charlottesville, and you even go back to the plantation cabins. But let's get some of the other panelists in on the discussion. I'd like to start with a moment in time during the Civil Rights Movement. And we had a student activist who's here with us tonight, Susan Marshall. I wonder if we can play Susan's clip, a bit of that, for our listeners and viewers.
I got a letter from my father, which is precious that we were doing letters. And he says, this is that's the father-daughter part. And then he says, I appreciate and admire, I don't know if I'm going to this. Okay, I appreciate and admire you for your thoughtfulness for your friends and their cause. Because those are the girls on my hall, kids on the hall. Standing for and believing in gets rough on one sometimes. Makes no difference how right one is. One has to take abuse, curses, all the other cruel treatment. I would just have to punch somebody in the nose. I am very much concerned about you, other than I love you. I worry about you physically and mentally over the cause. Please try to give moral effort from here on in. But hope if you can walk, after you picket, you will have someone with you. Please don't do it at night if other time is possible. Dress different each time and do hair different so some crackpot won't spot you alone. Promise you will inform me at once if trouble. Close your ears to the language and pray softly for the one who is yelling at you. I don't want anything to hurt you, to harm you. I wish I could let you know what you mean to me. It is not comparison to what African American people had and their children went through. So I'm not trying to make a parody to that. But there were parents, and there were at least 2 dozen of us there, and were parents who were concerned for his safety.
Susan, we can really hear in that letter and your emotion. Your father was very proud of you, but really afraid for you, his daughter. I wanted to ask you, and may I call you Susan?
Please do.
Yeah. How did seeing racism at a young age affect you and result in your participating in protests? Because, you know, that was something for a young person to go out there.
I've been giving a lot of thought to this and always realized my family was outliers in Forsyth County. And I thought about this timeline, how I could explain how I understood. And in the documentary, there's a point where I talk about the North Carolina law of riding on the bus and those things. And I got to thinking that just a quick timeline. May 14, 1954 was Brown versus Board of Education. My birthday, my 10th birthday, was May 29th, 1954. June 9th, 1954, Army McCarthy hearings. All of these were televised now. These were things that my family was very passionate about, and I knew about. I mean, Joseph Welch, I can still see him. I can still see him and hear him saying, "Have you no decency?" So that was the bottom line. Also, and then we were supporters of Adelaide Stevenson, 1954, 56. So you see how that generation of television view, these things were broadcast daily and did not dissuade it, right? So I think that's how I could come. And then there was John Kennedy, and then We were supporters of Stevenson, but he didn't win, but he got to be the 5th ambassador to the UN, which was an incredible time there. So as a family, how could we not understand the simplest thing about humanity and fairness? So if that explains how I can see now as I sit here, and I admire Frederick being all of 41, but I've lived a few more years longer than that, but I can still see the Apple restaurant on Tate Street. I can still see the girls, and they said, do not talk. I didn't have a very Southern accent then or ever, and they said, don't talk because you'll be an outsider. They'll for sure think you're an outsider. This is maybe too much memory, but so I've just often wondered that myself. And when I even did that with Frederick, I thought, well, how old was I when I had that recollection? And that's why I put together the timeline. And you can see how I would have noticed what was going on by then.
Yeah, you paint a real picture of yourself as that girl on that line with your father being proud but afraid. So take us to the woman, Susan, and how what you did then affected how you lived your life and the person you are today.
You know, it wasn't just a one-off. So I could live my life then because I lived my life for 10 years prior to that, my father coming off World War II. So it's really a continuum, right? And the effect of it was to be proud, was to feel every victory that happened, a little bit as if I had small part in it. I went on to work in politics, which I love very much, and was lucky enough to work for candidates who were honest and fair and contributing. So it's just the same path, right? Just different people. And then I spent I came back to North Carolina. I left in 1967, came back in 2017, almost, so I'm a returned migrant. And it's different, but the community we found in Burlington, where we live, is quite different. It's everybody's in that neighborhood. Everybody lives in that neighborhood. Everybody walks the trails, plays baseball, plays cricket, plays lacrosse. Whatever they brought with them is with us.
Yeah.
So,
well, a little bit of an arc to that story. Now, Frederick, when you were putting your film together, what was the importance of Susan's story? How important is her story to have a place in that documentary?
It was very important. Susan kind of fell in my lap. I had a presentation and a screening at the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum. I screened The American South as We Know It there. And everyone had gotten up and left. I'm winding down, getting ready to pack up and everything. And this lady walks over to me and she was, I don't know, Susan, they just kind of, I don't know if you were kind of timid or what have you. I doubt it with everything that you've been able to accomplish in life. But, she came up to me and so you're looking at these two individuals from two different generations. And someone actually captured a picture of that. And I have that picture and we're sitting there talking and she says, that film that you just showed reminded me of so many things that happened during this specific time period. And when she said that, I was already in that process thinking with some of my clients, how do I utilize film to also share this message of what reconciliation can possibly look like? And then I have this white lady in front of me, a little bit older than me, that is up here and being honest and saying, hey, this experience, I'm familiar with it via this perspective. So it was very important because I didn't have to go out and find another older white lady that was so forthcoming with her story to share and be brutally honest and very genuine. And that was the biggest thing is when I came to sit down with her and her family, it was just open arms, and she was willing and ready to share. So I think that just having her perspective, and obviously from what you just heard, her family histories, attitude towards the subject matter was just, you know, it was very pertinent to have it. So
You really can see how what effect a family has on their children and their worldview, and how important it is for parents to set an example. I want to say we have some great questions coming in. Keep them coming. I do want to get to our other panelists, though. And I want to turn next to Speech, who, of course, is a respected hip hop artist. He's a creative innovator, but he experienced racism firsthand as a child. And I have to say those experiences never leave you. So I wonder if we could see a clip of Speech recounting some of those in the documentary.
Nigger, literally, constantly, so much to where I didn't even really know that it was out of place. And these were by a lot of what I considered my friends. So I knew that just by the usage of the word and the energy that came from it, I knew it wasn't great, but I didn't even know to protest it because this was just happening on a casual basis. And then back when I was young, there was in Milwaukee what's called greasers, which was sort of like gangs at the time. And sort of like the Fonz from Happy Days. It was a thing back in my youth. And they would come, and I had an older brother named Terry. They would come, and me and Terry would be walking from the park, and they'd come and beat my brother up and hold him upside down and smash his head against the concrete to where his head literally was just bleeding from the top to the bottom of his chin. And I'm a little kid watching this, and I didn't know why it was happening. My older sister, who's not a blood sister, she was adopted. My mother was big on foster children. She had to run and catch these guys and scare them off in order to keep my brother from being killed. Same time, when I was younger, white people would come to our house. We was the only black family in this neighborhood. And they would come to our house. One day I came home from school, and we had a beautiful picture window in the front of our home. And I came home from school, and it was smashed out. And so I'm walking down the hill. I could see our house at the bottom of this hill, and I'm seeing it all smashed out. At this time, I'm probably 8 or 9. I forget exactly how old I was. And I'm walking up to the window, and I see it smashed out. All of our living room furniture was on top of our roof. They had taken all of our furniture, put it on top of the roof. They had sprayed swastikas all on our front door and our back door. Our playground, which I used to swing on and climb, and, you know, monkey bars and all of that had been with a sledgehammer just smashed and just demolished. This is my youth in Milwaukee.
Those kind of experiences, when you brought it up, is so visceral. When you relive those, did you have any revelations about how they shaped you and your work and your later life?
Yes. You got to take a big sigh, because it's still, I'm 52. I was probably 8 or 9 when that happened. But it still hurts like it was yesterday. And it's not just that event, it's the fact of a society that, you know, by and large is against you. They don't want to see you succeed. They don't understand you, and you are not welcomed fully. And that is the underlying tension that is on an everyday basis. I could recount stories beyond those 2 that I mentioned on the documentary that have happened since then, all the way up to last month in my own neighborhood now. So yes, they have a huge effect on me, but what I've realized is they have a huge effect on all Black people. And on a spiritual level, it has a huge effect on all of this nation, white, Black, Latino, Native American, everyone. It affects us because it is sin. And sin by nature is physical. It takes on physicality. It's an act that is wrong and off the mark and evil, but by nature of it taking place, it affects everyone. The people that it's directed towards, and even the people that are doing the sinning. And we as a country have this huge bulge of sin underneath this rug that needs to be addressed from a systemic level in order for this nation to start to reconcile. So yes, I definitely feel it in a very real way to this very day.
Yeah. Now, while you were having these things, you also had parents that you have shared. Through them, you got great knowledge and consciousness. Your father became an entrepreneur several times over. He hired Black workers to work there, to help to be an activist. Your mother started a newspaper. You know, in the same way Susan had her influences of her family, you had, with all of this going on, a very strong examples from your parents and your family. Can you talk a little bit about the parental influences and how important they are for young people growing up? Because so much of your art is political as well.
I love to talk about that. Yes, my parents, as you already stated, activists, conscious, intentional, purposeful, but I will say that they got it from their parents. And so then this takes us into an ancestral viewpoint of my mother's mother was also an educator. My father's mother was an activist. My mother's mother's mother was one of the first Black educators in the East St. Louis area. My point is that from an ancestral standpoint, I was extremely blessed to be able to have a family that from a long time ago made this decision to buck this existing oppression that was already happening in the ways that they could at the time. So my parents took on that mantle and moved it forward, and it gave me a head start over many of my friends who may have not, well, who definitely did not have both parents around, and also whose parental and ancestral relationships were more scarred than my parents' ancestral relationships were. So I had a benefit, and still the pain remains. So I can't, I can only imagine what so many of my peers felt who didn't have that same sort of strong ancestral activism background.
Yeah, I can really relate to that as having two very strong, very activist parents. I have to, of course, ask you about, so many people know you as a hip hop artist, and you chose through that art form to express so many of your politics, so much of your politics and your beliefs and your strong stance. So I just would like to talk to you a little bit about, if you can say how you chose that art form and how you feel that it can be used basically in a political way.
I lost you a little bit, but I think I understand the question.
Oh yeah, no, just sort of about expressing all your strengths, your beliefs, you know, the history. A lot of your work is that. And I think when a lot of people think hip hop, they don't think that. But of course, you know, Grammy-winning artist, and you expressed it in that way. So talk about your art a little bit.
Sure. I fell in love with hip hop back in the late 70s with the group Sugar Hill Gang, and hip hop is more than just rap. So it's rap, graffiti art, beatboxing, breakdancing, turntablism. It's all of that. So I fell in love with Sugar Hill Gang in 78. I fell in love with Grandmaster Flash and the Wheels of Steel record that he put out with his group back in 79. And it just went on from there. What I've come to believe is that hip hop music is a godsend to the world, but especially to Black people who created it, to be able to get our stories out. Chuck D said back in the 80s that hip hop music or rap music is the CNN for Black folks. And I believe that that at the height, or at hip hop at its best, can and should be that kind of voice. In the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, hip hop took on a much more diverse, purposeful output, meaning there was groups like NWA who were saying F the police and talking about gang life in Los Angeles, but at the exact same time, there was groups like Public Enemy who was speaking about Farrakhan or the Black Panthers or, you know, so on and so forth. and Arrested Development and Tribe Called Quest and everything else in between, from MC Hammer to Live Crew. So there was this diverse Black voice. And the reason I think that hip hop is from God is that we have an opportunity to use this export, which I think it's our biggest export as Black people, hip hop music is, entertainment is, to be able to tell our story throughout the world and help people to understand the truths about us, to counteract so much of the negative propaganda that has been wielded against us. So I use my music in that framework, and that's what I've been doing since '91 with my crew, Arrested Development.
Great. Someone actually has a question for you in particular, saying, why do you know the reason why your parents chose to move to a neighborhood, an all-white neighborhood where there was such resistance?
It's what many Black families did if they could, which was to try to escape some of the tensions and the boiling pot of tension that was happening within the ghetto, and then also to have some of the opportunities, the schooling opportunities, the lifestyle opportunities, the American dream. Mm-hmm. And so they were the first in their family to move into this meager middle-class household in a very suburban white neighborhood. And yeah, I think that that's the reason they did it.
No, I can relate to that. Here in Charlotte, North Carolina, I live in a neighborhood that had restricted covenants in the deeds that you could not sell or rent to anyone not of the Caucasian race. And after the Fair Housing Act of 1968, that legally couldn't be it, but still as a matter of culture and society, you couldn't really move in those neighborhoods. But as you say, you know, that is a part of the American dream, but part of history is that that was withheld for so long. So I think we really don't know enough about that history. So I want to thank you so much. And I want to turn to Ray now, Ray Mckinnon. And I wonder, in the documentary, you talk somewhat about the way that racism has been used in government. And I just talked about housing laws. And you talk a little bit about the voting, the gerrymandering, the voter ID laws, which we know so much about here in North Carolina, which we had that law that federal court said attacked Black voters with almost surgical precision. So it's sort of, and now we see after the last election where so many African Americans and minorities and young people voted, that a lot of state legislators are trying to limit the vote and have more restrictions and purge voter rolls. So Ray, I wonder if you could talk about government using tactics and maybe that particular tactic and why it's so relevant today.
Listen, if we need any more example about why our votes are important, we need only look to Georgia and what happens. We know that when Black folks in particular vote, they are more likely than not to vote Democratic, not because the Democratic Party has been, frankly, that done as good with, their policies have been as good for Black folks as Republicans, but frankly, as it stands now, they're the ones who are not trying to place barriers in place. If the government, if the folks who are making the rules can choose their voters, they can stay in power longer, frankly. We see that when we disenfranchise the vote, when we try to place barriers in front of folks to vote, it decreases the vote. When folks are allowed to vote, more times than not, they're going to choose representatives who are more closely working for them. And we're seeing right now, Black folks and brown folks are voting overwhelmingly Democratic. And again, that's not to say that the Democratic Party has done as good as we should have done, or they should have done, but that's just what happens. But it's not just in voting. It's, we see it's on local policies, right? If we're talking right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, folks are still being disenfranchised by something talk about the Fair Housing Act. I mean, people can be disenfranchised based on how they get their money, whether or not they earn it or not, and source of income. And it impacts overwhelmingly Black folks and brown folks, single mothers. So we need to make sure that we are in the process of using our voices and not allowing folks to disenfranchise us on the federal level or on the local level, whether they're Republicans or whether they're Democrats. And that is the thing that happens, not just in Charlotte, but happens around the nation.
Have you seen any developments that give you hope as we try to fight all of these ways that institutional and systemic racism have really become entrenched in the system? Are some things being done now that you can see that there have been some positive changes?
I think at the grassroots level, we have enough people who are recognizing that in a democracy, it is the people who hold the power, and folks are wise and are starting to wise up and take their power. We saw it again happen in Georgia, and we hope to see it here, and not just so one political party can win, but so that we are collectively working together. I feel like even here locally in Charlotte, there are enough of grassroots leaders who are saying we might not agree on everything, but the reality is we have to band together, we have to work together to ensure that our voices are heard, and not just heard, but that we are the ones who are raising the voices and now at the table, right? So I think on a grassroots level, folks are seeing that when we work together, when we work collectively, we can have more power than if we're working in our silos and just fighting. Because I think folks are seeing if they can keep us separated, we have no power. But folks are starting to say we need to work together and hold accountable all of the people who are making decisions for us without us.
Yeah, and to turn it around to where you started, Georgia, people would have said that was impossible, right?
Exactly.
But that was grassroots people getting together, which is why you see a lot of voting bills being put up.
Exactly. Well, they know if they can disenfranchise voters, if they can make it hard, that then their time is short. I mean, when you are not reflecting the will of the people, you can only win by cheating. And so that's what's happening, is that folks know that their policies are out of step with the majority of the people. So instead of them coming around and saying, how can we bring more people in? They're saying, we've got to hold on to power by keeping as many people out because they can't have it both ways. You can't appease white supremacists and expand your base. So what you have to do is restrict it by cheating.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that John Lewis Voting Act floating around the House and trying to get passage in the Senate for quite a while. We'll see what happens with that now. I want to bring Mr. Jacobs, Alvin Jacobs Jr. into the conversation because he has some really harrowing testimony about being in Charlottesville on that day of the Unite the Right rally. There was nowhere to go. I believe you tweeted that someone was going to get killed, and someone did, obviously. You know, Heather Heyer was killed, and you didn't know if law enforcement was there to help and who was who, and you couldn't get away. Could you talk a little bit about your thoughts about that day and your reflections since on that experience that you had?
Absolutely. My thoughts on that day was kind of between safety and, oh my God, all hell is breaking loose. So if you can imagine being around thousands of people, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands, and not knowing which side the individuals around you are on. See, when you're playing sports, you know, there's the home team and there's the away team. You have an idea based upon the uniforms or based upon maybe some of the signs they're holding, some of the chants. See, this was different. Everyone looked the same. You didn't realize that maybe these individuals over here kind of had similar ideologies to your own. And then maybe some of the people over here were just completely of a different mindset. Because again, there weren't any robes, right? People had on maybe different colors and things like that, but it was so much chaos and the police were everywhere. from state police to the National Guard to local law enforcement. But there was so much going on, so much violence happening in almost every single component. I was trying to figure out how to remain safe. So every few minutes, something was happening. Every few minutes, there was an altercation. Every few minutes, there was a violent outbreak, and the police were around the entire time. So if there was a fight happening, 20, 30, 40, 50 feet away from me, law enforcement was closer. And this happened every single time. So right before Heather was murdered, there was the altercation of the young Black man who got caught by himself inside the parking garage. I was standing maybe 20 feet away. I saw the entire thing. And I'm sitting here watching the National Guard lined up maybe 50 feet away. This happened right in front of a fire station. Literally right next to a fire station was a parking garage. So law enforcement was already on the scene. But what was most harrowing, right, was that it was 98% non-Black people. 98%. So the altercations were happening between white folks. But what gave me hope was that the city of Charlottesville and some of the individuals who were there against the rally were pushing back. No one was laying down. You weren't hearing, we don't necessarily agree with you. We want you gone. We're going to do everything in our power to propel this physically. We're not hoping and praying and begging and wishing for you to go away. We're going to do everything in our power physically to ensure that you do. That was powerful to me. That was one of the greatest things that I took away. There was a white gentleman that was walking down the street. Actually, one of the images that I published with one of our articles together. He was walking down the street and he was bleeding profusely from his head. He was walking by himself, and I'm like, I'm so tired of this. And he's about 10 feet away from me. He's bleeding profusely, holding his head, and he said, "What's wrong?" This man had just been assaulted however many minutes ago, and he's asking me what's wrong. Am I okay? He was like, "Do you need any help?" I lost it right then. This was a white man I didn't know from Adam, was asking me, was I okay? And I'm like, you know what? I think we're going to be all right. I think we're going to, in the midst of all of this stuff going on, I think we're going to be okay because there's still humanity. There's still empathy. People still care. And we're pushing back because, again, an equal or greater force. A lot of people think if you just ignore, right, the foolishness, if you just ignore the anger, if you just ignore the violence, they'll just go away. Well, what happened at the Capitol? Did they just go away? You have to react with an equal or greater force. You can't just pray it away. You can't just hope it away. You've got to do something about it physically if there's a physical force that's attacking what you believe in.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the Capitol. When you saw those scenes, you must have had a flashback.
I thought the worst. I'm surprised it ended the way it did. I thought there would have been when I'm telling you, I've never been more afraid, right? I've been covering and documenting social justice rallies and protests for almost 11 years. That's the worst I've seen it. I've never seen it the way I saw it in Charlottesville. And I was afraid. If I'm telling you I wasn't afraid, I'm lying. I was afraid. I was absolutely in fear for my life.
Yeah. And will you continue to do this work? Is this something that you feel is a mission for you? What is in your future as far as your work and your mission, Alvin?
So when I had started, there wasn't that much going on as far as documentation. There wasn't really a lot of funding around it, and there wasn't a lot of platforms available for the finished product. So I just became a documentarian and an image activist, not just by default, by of course intention, but I used to ask myself, what kind of man would I have been in the 60s? You know, Speech is a little bit older than me, and I remember all of the stories I used to hear about Milwaukee. I'm from Rockford, like 90 miles north of Milwaukee, and I heard all the bad things about Milwaukee. And I had cousins that were in Wauwatosa. So I decided that I wasn't a philanthropist. I couldn't financially give to the cause, right? I wasn't an organizer. I really couldn't rally all of the people, but I was pretty good with the camera. So how would I show up? I asked my parents, Mom, Dad, how were you guys, showing up during the civil rights era? Well, in Rockford, there wasn't a civil rights movement at all. It was 90 miles north of Chicago, but it kind of just missed that element. I wanted to have a say-so in history. I wanted to be able to show up with something tangibly. So I hope that not only am I continuing to document protests in the reactionary mindset, right? I can continue to kind of build a platform of reconciliation, because what we're trying to do right now in government is kind of like whisk past what just happened a few weeks ago. Hey, look over here. Woo, everything's okay. No, it's not. And without the history, right? Without hip hop, right? Without the written word, we're going to lose a lot of what's taken place over the past few decades. And I want to be a part of what's tangibly taking place. With photographic evidence, it's kind of difficult to say what happened didn't happen. With video, with art, it's kind of difficult to say what happened didn't happen. And I want to continue to be a part of not just the progress of change, but the physical act of archiving the truth, because revisionist history is real. Frederick, as a historian, speech, brother, you've been putting down for hip hop for years. If what you have thought wasn't written down, and if what you researched, Frederick, wasn't captured, it didn't happen. I want to be a part of the facts, not just emotions, not just what I thought, not just in theory, but the facts of what took place while I was here on this earth.
Yeah, and we know how powerful that evidence is. Before we get to our questions, and we have some great ones, I want to bring Bill Sizemore into our discussion. And Bill discovered as a grown man that he was descended from slave owners, and he was curious, and he wanted to know more about where they were from, where the descendants are. And he also found George, who he was looking for, and he found who was the descendant of slaves. And I want to show a clip from a dialogue, and then we're going to come back to Bill, and he's going to fill us in on a little bit of where their conversations led.
I know how the race as a whole has been treated, but we can't live from yesterday.
One thing I've learned from this experience, from our Uncle George's and my journey together, is when you sit down across from somebody and get to know them on a personal level, that makes all the difference in the world.
I can't hate you for what your granddaddy did. I mean, what's the point? My point is, as I said before, is to educate ourselves, learn how to love one another.
100 or more years of segregation in this society where we were kept apart. I think that really lies at the root of the problems we're having today.
Very powerful. Can you tell us a bit about your curiosity and your coming together and that whole sentiment about getting to know someone on a personal level?
Yeah, it's been quite an odyssey for me. As you said, pretty late in life, I was around 60, I think, when I discovered that my ancestors were slave owners. And it really inspired me to go out and try to find descendants of those slaves. I just really felt compelled to do that. And I was lucky in several respects to find Uncle George and his family. He was an amazing resource. When I first met him, he was in his early 90s. He's now 101, by the way, still with us. And we become good friends. And yeah, the point I made in the film was, it's when you get to know somebody on a personal level that you come to understand that, you know, difference in skin color notwithstanding, we're the same. We're all the same. You know, that it's just been a really rewarding experience for me, getting to know Uncle George and his family. I've been to several of their family reunions, which are wonderful affairs. It's just opened up a whole new world for me.
Have you shared some of your discoveries with members of your family, and do they support your looking into this?
I'm asked that a lot. Yes, I have shared. In fact, when my book came out, Uncle George and Me, about 2 years ago, I brought a box full of the books to my family reunion, and you know, everybody that wanted one got one. I have not gotten any overtly negative reactions from anybody in my family. I've gotten some positive reactions, but for the most part, I would say people most of my cousins just haven't reacted one way or the other, which, you know, I'm not sure how to take that. It could be that, you know, that Southern gentility, the idea that, well, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything. There may be some of that going on, but no, I have not received any hostility, and that is not always the case. I have become acquainted with some other white people who have undertaken similar projects. You know, looked into their own family history, found that they were slave owners, and in some cases, they have encountered extreme hostility. You know, I mean, like in a couple of cases, people stopped talking to each other. You know, some white people have a hard time coming to grips with that history, which I think, you know, just underlines how important it is to tell that history. A historian that I quote in the book said something like, truth is the best disinfectant. We need to tell the truth about what happened in the past, I think, before we can truly hope to reach you know, healing and reconciliation.
Yeah, you said you started this journey late in life. Is there some insight that you have gotten from embarking on it well, you're still at the end, you're still on that journey, but something that you said you start off late in life, did you learn something new? Did something hit you?
I learned a lot about how Black people have, what they've had to endure. You know, I grew up, I'm 72. I grew up in a completely segregated society. I had almost no contact with Black people. And so I didn't truly appreciate until I took this journey how painful that history is for Black people. They, they are sometimes, I found in some cases, they don't want to revisit those memories because they're too painful.
Yeah.
So it's given me a new appreciation for what African Americans have gone through.
Yes, your talk about reconciliation. I had on my last podcast, Dr. Gail Christopher, who talks about having a truth, racial healing and transformation commission to have that truth before we can heal. And I think she's getting some support in Congress from Representative Barbara Lee and Senator Cory Booker, because so many countries have to do that.
I think that's a great idea. I think this country really would benefit from something like that.
I want to get to the questions, and hope Frederick can kick this off. And I'm weaving some together because we've gotten quite a bit of questions on healing and reconciliation, and I want Frederick to maybe talk about the importance of that and next steps. We have one after George Floyd and the insurrection at the Capitol. Many said, "This is not who we are." Please speak to how you respond to that statement and whether the U.S. can reconcile if that's the prevailing sentiment by a majority of Americans. In the same vein, another question, as we listen to the presenters, how can we heal when we do not have consensus on the problem, and who needs to heal? So, Frederick, can we turn to this very difficult topic of, we know we need healing and reconciliation, but we're coming from so many different places.
If I had the answer to how to solve that on a macro level, I think I would be a very wealthy man right now, right? I'm wealthy spiritually, but pockets can use a little bump, right? So that's a very difficult thing to do on a macro level. And that was part of the reason in which why I did this film, because reconciliation in some instances is so individualized. So with what Bill was discussing with Uncle George, one thing that he didn't mention, and I'm sure that eventually he will get around to it, is that Uncle George is really a diamond in the rough. He's a needle in the haystack. Uncle George was, his father was enslaved, right? So I think Uncle George was, and Bill, he can correct me on this, but I think Uncle George was 12 when his father passed, right? So, if two people can sit down in rural Virginia, discuss their family histories, as painful as it has been, and come to an agreement collectively, right? Via communicating and sitting down and getting to know each other and put measures in place. And he details this in his book with regards to how reconciliation looks like for them, then other individuals can do it as well, right? I think that, what has been indoctrinated in our minds and in society for so long is part of the moral injury of this country, which from a superiority standpoint, you have individuals pulling rank and utilizing privilege, utilizing financial status, et cetera, to dehumanize other individuals, when the reality is all it takes is a stock market crash, or all it takes is a death in this, or it takes that to happen to have us all on the equal playing field, right? So, I think it's very individualized, and that's where I would start in doing such. Because if we are saying that we need to depend on the government to make it happen, well, where's that gotten us? If we are waiting sometimes even on local officials to make that happen, where's that gotten us, right? Mm-hmm. So it really has to be an individual choice. You have to be fully vested in humanity and be assertive and very intentional about healing these wounds, in which I truly feel is the moral injury of this country.
Mm.
Mary.
Yes.
I think one thing, like, to answer that one, when people say this isn't who we are, of course this is who we are. This is who we are. This is who we have been. We serve nobody by pretending that it isn't. So that's one thing. But I think something that we miss here is the Uncle George who we speak about here, his father was enslaved. A person who is still alive today, father was enslaved. So one other thing we have got to stop doing is telling Black folks to get over it and to stop saying, I can't atone for what my father did or my mother did. Sure, you can't. But this isn't as far off history as so many of us want to believe. We want to kumbaya past this. Listen, I am a minister. I'm not a former minister, I'm still a minister. And I know a little something about kumbaya, but we cannot get to the kumbaya until we have had a reckoning. And for too often, we think reconciliation means accepting something as vile as enslaving people. If we can't get there until there has to be some recompense. I know it was something about repentance. You have to repent first and acknowledge it. You can't just passively say, it was my ancestors who did it. Sure, it was. But there has to be, before there can be reconciliation, there has to be truth. And the truth is, we have not gotten over it because we have not confronted it. We have not confronted it because we center white fragility all of the time. We have to name it plainly and say it plainly, because our playing around the edges has not served Black folks, brown folks, and it hasn't served the all too often centered white folks either. It just leaves us in the state where we are right now. And so we have to have truth, and we cannot get past it. Uncle George's dad was an enslaved person, and Uncle George is still alive. Sit with that. That is bizarre that we think now that we can just get over it without confronting it. A living person's dad was enslaved. That's the one thing I still haven't gotten over. And I watched the documentary months ago, and that still sits with me.
Oh, yeah.
In my opinion, what America is hoping for is for all the Uncle Georges to no longer be with us. So because it keeps saying, well, no one I know was enslaved. No one I know was a slave owner. So we're trying to spread those generations as far and as wide as we can. So we can just go ahead and forget about like it never happened. But we keep repeating history over and over and over again. So once this break in our culture took place, we've never healed. We've never healed from this chasm of not just physical slavery, right? Not just legal slavery, mentally. We don't have a grasp of our people. That has never been dealt with. So our communities, our level of education, our language, it's gone. It's gone. So when we keep looking at each generation, everyone else is just widening the gap. Not just the wealth gap, because that's what we can tangibly see, right? We're losing grip of our culture. I mean, there are some communities in this world, all they have is their culture, and it's very rich. So we don't have the money or the culture. We don't have the resources or the finances. So again, and Uncle George is still with us, but sooner or later, that's no longer going to be the case. And I think that's what a lot of individuals are depending on, that we no longer have someone we can touch, right? Who has an active imagination or an active recollection of exactly what took place those many years ago. And I think we're doing ourselves and our community and our country a disservice if we keep talking about getting over something that we've never come to grips with. We're going to continue this process over and over again. Maybe not with chattel slavery. It may come in the form of redlining. It may come in the form of gerrymandering. It may come in the form of privatized prisons. It may come in the form of look at healthcare. Look at the disproportionate amount of individuals that can get a shot for COVID. Racism. The same racism that we keep telling everyone to get over.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
I would like to just say that from a macro level, whatever we can do to strive to change our educational system so that kids of new generations are learning the truth about African contributions worldwide, about what exactly has happened historically with Black and white people here in this country. If right now, most history books cover slavery in 1 or 2 or 3, 4 or 5 pages, and cover Greek history and Roman history and so many other things in multiple chapters. We need to reverse that. So those that have the ability to try to pass legislation and change educational systems to where we start to tell the truth, because all of this that we're talking about tonight resides in a context, and the context is what we are standing upon. It's history. The history that the brothers and sisters on this panel have spoken about is what we are all standing upon. We're not separate from it. And so if young kids can understand the context of where this race thing went off balance, then we can start to have right thinking on what laws should be passed, what should we never have happen again, what we must beware of, what are the red flags that we could see in the near future, whether it be through healthcare or through the various numerous new ways that it can come up. But we've got to start teaching people differently on a macro level. As Brother Frederick said, if we can't accomplish that, in the meanwhile, educate as many people as possible, one-on-one, in group, like we're doing here tonight, through my music, which generally reaches millions, documentaries reach numerous people. I've done documentaries. I have a documentary series called The N-Word Factory. I did that for this very purpose. Books like White Fragility help white people to understand their whiteness. Many whites aren't even aware that they are white. They understand that they're white, but not the culture of whiteness, not how society treats whiteness, what that means historically. So teaching people differently, whether on a minor level, one-on-one, or as small groups, or on a macro level from a systemic standpoint, I think is extremely important.
Yeah, Speech, you must have been looking at the questions. First of all, somebody wants all of you to commit to a traveling roadshow to have a conversation with the public. But when you talk about education, we've got questions like, how do we get white people to face the truth about Black history and its impact on Black people today? If we need to learn the truth, how do we get North Carolina and all the states to teach the truth about the painful Black history? And for Frederick, how might historians, museum professionals, archivists in particular, strive toward using history to bring healing in their communities? And we've seen a lot of, even in North Carolina, the debate over changing the social studies curriculum, and there been pushback by people that don't want to face that. And in states like Iowa and Arkansas, trying to defund schools that would teach from the 1619th Project that talks about centering forms of slavery into how the development of this country came about. So maybe Frederick can talk a little bit about that whole sense of changing how we teach history, which you do with your documentaries, and the fact that there's still some pushback on that.
Yeah, I think I saw in Utah this week, there was a district to where the parents had the ability to vote for there not to be Black history in the curriculum.
Yeah, they could opt out. Yeah, they could opt their kids out. Yes,
they could opt out. That in itself is that's where we're at, right? We're at a space in life to where in our education system, these specific school districts have the ability, and parents have the ability to not teach their children inclusive material. And, we would be remiss if we didn't bring up our Indigenous brothers and sisters and our Afro-Indigenous brothers and sisters. And that's why I had an individual from the Indigenous community also in the documentary to talk about conditions on reservations, where he is at subjectively with regards to wanting to make things better on reservation, right? And and he's a young individual, he's in his 20s, and he's saying, let's make things better on reservations, give us the opportunity to have the same resources, et cetera, et cetera. An older individual may say, well, I do want my land back, right? So these are the different point of views that I was hoping individuals will be able to catch via this documentary. And it's one of the things in which we have to say, okay, to atone for everything that has happened throughout this country's history, being specifically in America, which is one of the biggest melting pots, globally, right? How can you not be inclusive of all the greatness that resides here in this country, right? Like when you talk about tech, when you talk about food, when you talk about dance, when you talk about clothing, when you talk about all the things that quote unquote makes this country great, but yet you want to keep some individuals out in the cold if they're not necessarily contributing in the way that you want to, right? And then on top of that, there's glass ceilings that are there to a certain degree because of the fact that if they get too high, then it's a problem. And we have to do something like what they did in Utah to make things back, to take things back to where I am able to hold on to this supremacist ideology or these supremacist rules and regulations and policies. So again, I'll go back to the whole moral injury thing. We are shooting ourselves in the foot by not being 100% inclusive with all of these great cultures that are in this country, that continues to come to this country, that has contributed to this country, by saying that we are going to pull certain colors of the jelly beans out the jar because we're not ready for that yet. And unfortunately, the underdogs aren't the individuals that get to make that decision, right? Yeah. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, I think I read that after an outcry that Utah school changed its policy, but there had to be an outcry.
Yeah, it had to be an outcry. Yeah.
We have a great question. I feel as a society, this is from Jacqueline, that we focus a lot on the overt racism, but our society has a bigger problem, she says, with indirect. I think, the microaggressions. How would you like to see the U.S. tackle this very problem on a political level, even locally in Charlotte?
I think the vote that the city council took yesterday, that took the recommendations from this commission they stood up, is perfectly speaks to this. And I think it's good to symbolically do away with overt, renaming Stonewall Street or whatever. But, just doing things on the outside, like changing a name, does nothing to really get to the root of the problem. I think it's the point of the question. Again, I keep going back to this. We cannot face where we've become or where we are now if we don't look to where we were and make amends for that. And I don't know what that looks like, but it has to be dealt with. Something, I think it was James Baldwin who said, to be African-American is to be African without the memory and American without the privilege. The first thing that has to also be recognized is that my experience as a Black cisgender heterosexual man is different than my transgender Black woman in this country. Is different. I have a privilege that she doesn't. Everybody needs to recognize, especially white folks, need to recognize the privilege they have, and not just say, okay, I got privilege, but to say, what am I going to, now that I know that, how now am I going to live? How now am I going to make amends? How will I step back? How will I learn myself and not put the onus on the aggrieved, on people who are constantly put upon? What will I do myself? How will you as a village stand together? How will the Bill Sizemores ensure that his family and these folks really take an account for what's happened, to own it, the dark parts of it as well, and say we're going to do better for the people who are not here yet. It is taking that responsibility, my white siblings, to do that hard work on yourself also.
Yeah. This is a great discussion. I'm trying to get to as many of the questions as I can. I do want to get a little round robin from everyone. And maybe we can start with Susan. We haven't heard from you in a while. what do you say to your friends who did not have your upbringing and your consciousness about these issues? What are your conversations like with them?
I think this is going to sound funny, but book clubs are pretty incredible. And Frederick knows on the back of my car, I have a small sticker that says literacy and justice for all. And in our little town of Burlington, our young mayor has a book club. And you should see his reading list. So, and people who still worry about the lost cause or the northern aggression are there to learn, and they actually do. They actually do hear. So, and there's just so many books. So I generally say, read this book to answer your question, or because I do think it's a kind of an illiteracy that happens. And right now we have Caste. If you haven't read Caste, please. I mean, that tells so much. And even I read recently My Vanishing Country by Barack Sellers, which I recommend. So it's hard to tell people what to do, but if you can explain it or take them along, or I just suggest if you go to a place and everybody there looks just like you, you're in the wrong place, or you should do something about that place. And I think you just have to, it's hard work. You got to do the work. You know, I can't just tell somebody to change. I can show them change. I can say, come to my neighborhood, meet Shirley across the street, you know, meet Dave down the block who helped me when I got a storm last year. I knocked on his door and I said, I've got a propane tank I can't move and I think it's going to explode. You know, you have to do the work. You have to do the work and live in the world. And when you see somebody, you know, talk to them. When you're out walking, you know, you say hello, say what's up, or whatever. So that sounds small. I know that sounds small, and I know I have appreciated this whole discussion, and it is powerful, and we know that. But most people live on a block. Most people live on a street. They live near a park. And if they can see and open their eyes a little bit and hand them a book.
Yeah, no, I know.
It could help. Mary, don't you think? I mean, it really matters. There's such, I mean, the warmth of other suns. I mean, we have, it's all there for us, which used to be hidden. And we maybe like Speech says, we need to export down the street. We need to export across the county. And I do want to say that just one thing I want to share. I was in Graham. My son and I went to a legacy march, Get Out the Vote march in Graham. And it started at the AME church. I don't know if you've heard about it in Charlotte, but it started at the AME church, and we all walked peacefully, and we sang songs, and people joined the parade, and we got down there, and there were some speeches, because it was Get Out the Vote. The idea was to go from the square under the Confederate statue down to vote. But there was a point in the beginning where we had 9 minutes of silence, and we were asked to think of George Floyd during that time. And many of us did get down on our knees on the pavement, and it was really touching. And I thought, I could not believe 9 minutes was so long. And I could not believe somebody sat on somebody for 9 minutes and didn't understand the consequences, because it's painful and it's hard to do. So that 9 minutes was up, we stood up, and I turned around, and there was a police officer there, and he started spraying us. And we had just, they said, close it down, and we had just gone through prayer together, coming together. And that was physically painful and shocking. But the next week, they got back together, and it worked. People learned.
Yeah.
But you just got to do the work, Mary. I don't know what else to say. I
saw that in the news where they were tear gassing a woman in a wheelchair. And
there were children there. There was a cute little girl who joined because it was at Halloween time, and she had on a fairy costume. And there was nothing but quiet. The whole town, the whole small town, was absolutely quiet while we were honoring George Floyd and feeling some of that pain. Luckily, the shops were helpful and they got water to us, and it was just another bad moment.
Well, Susan, you have continued your activism your whole life. I do want to mention, if anyone wants to look up, the WFAE did a great interview with Bakari Sellers, whose book you referenced, and he
good
legislator from South Carolina, and speaking, as Ray said, of someone whose father was a slave. Bakari Sellers' father, Cleveland Sellers, was one of the students who was wounded during the Orangeburg massacre, and that was not all that long ago. So this is current.
And Mary, can I add, since you mentioned Bakari, and since I've been very quiet while all the men were speaking, I want to steal I'm going to hijack you for a moment, because this struck me from my vanishing country. He said, why is this all important? Why should we even care about what we're talking about tonight? And he said this, he said, a living pain of a cultural memory and a realization that I lived in a state where something like that could happen, and they tell me to get over it. I thought that was a living pain.
Yes, and as Ray said,
and I was hearing that earlier too from the Reverend. Yeah, thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you. We're going to go just a few minutes over because we want to wrap up. But I did want to get to. We have a bunch of questions from folks wanting to know about a courageous conversation. How should white people prepare for being able to engage in courageous conversations with Black people? How should they re-educate themselves? And Bill, since you're someone who put yourself in that situation, do you have a tip?
Well, what I would say is you have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone. It's all too easy to live in denial, to not face the truth. I often say that I think a lot of white people live in a state of self-induced amnesia, and we have to break out of that. We have to break out of that. We have to be willing to get out of our comfort zone, reach across those lines, those racial lines, cultural lines, what have you. It's got to be intentional. It's got to be. It takes effort. It takes effort. It's not easy. As you said, these are not easy conversations to have. But what I've found is, back before COVID, when I was doing in-person book talks, people would say to me, what can I do? What can I do? And that's what I would tell them. Get out of your comfort zone. Reach out to people of another race. And it really starts. I mean, as I think Frederick said, it's hard to know what to say about how do we fix this thing on a macro level, but we can each do something at a micro level. We can each, it really starts with each of us individually. That's what I would say.
Fantastic. Maybe one more question. Let me see. We have tons of them.
Mary, can I answer that one while you're looking for another one?
Yes.
Me too.
Okay. Well, then after that, we'll do a round robin.
All right.
Yeah. No.
I think it's important to say this. I don't think white folks are ready to have courageous conversations with a Black person until they're ready to have those courageous conversations in their own families. I think if they're not ready to confront their racist mom, dad, uncle, their own racism in their own family, it's not ready. You're not ready to have the courageous conversation. Have the courageous conversation with your folks first, with you first, before you do a courageous conversation with a Black person. Because if you've not done it within your own family, you're going to more likely than not impose upon the Black person. You're going to put your unresolved bigotry onto them, and it's not going to end well for either one of you.
Yeah. We had someone yes.
I'd like to add to it that there's a quote by a young South African boy that says, "Do what you can with what you have for the people around you." And it's a very simple quote, but everyone can enact that. So everyone, because there's some people with speaking ability. There's some people that are very knowledgeable about books. There's others that do great documentaries. There's people like myself who make music and documentaries. So do what you can with what you have for the people around you. And that can be the answer for people who are looking to answer the question, what can I do? Do what you can with what you have. Yeah. And with the people around you. I do music. I make documentaries because I'm good at them. So that's what I do. Arrested Development released a brand new album, Don't Fight Your Demons. I released a solo album just this last weekend called Expansion. Pass it around. I talk about these issues all the time. My documentaries that I've done, Frederick's documentary, pass that around. The book that Bill has done, pass that around. The knowledge that Susan has about protests and things that she's been through, pass that around. The book knowledge she has. My point is that people can do more than they think, but they can't. Sometimes they get frustrated if they don't have a simple solution. And I think do what you can with what you have for the people around you.
Right. Yeah. We have an interesting, this is more a comment than a question. I really can't believe that no one spoke to the issue of listening. No story ever is worth a hill of beans if no one is listening. But the larger issue is that listening, once it becomes part of the focus, may be discussed in and of itself. And high quality listening makes the storyteller feel trusted. Trust is everything. This is from Frederick Park. An interesting comment. And also, if we're doing some plugs, you can pick up Now What? The Voters Have Spoken, essays on life after Trump. I contributed in an essay, and some are serious, some are funny, and some just ask some questions. So for the last question, I want to go around to everyone, and we'll end with Frederick, and ask you about, with all of the things we have spoken about and all the challenges, what gives you optimism and hope moving forward right now in this situation where we've seen some really tough stuff on display and some problems that are tough right now. And we'll end with Frederick. So I want to hear what everyone has to say about that. Alvin?
Yes, ma'am. What gives me hope is the re-engagement of our youth. You know, we may not see the change in our lifetime, but our children and our children's children, I think they're on path with changing life as we know it. Not just with getting out to vote, but just becoming engaged in the socioeconomic struggle and culture, and just rebuilding themselves in their own communities. There's been a lot we haven't been able to accomplish, especially when we get a little older. We have to focus on the mortgage. We have to focus on, our children's college education. But our children are seeing our fight, and they're becoming not just consumers, but warriors. Not just in prayer, but in purpose. I think that in the next generation, we were almost up out of it. Right? If we hadn't elected Trump, I think we had maybe another generation or two to where we were going to be all right. Not, perfectly, but I think we had more of an opportunity. But I think now with hip hop specifically, right, it's becoming more of a universal language to getting to know your neighbor. So with culture, you can kind of overlook some things that are uncomfortable. Well, with culture, you can begin to embrace some things that are uncomfortable. So I think that our youth are going to be the ones that are going to be in charge of a better future for not only themselves, but for generations to come. So I think that we're going to be okay because of what we're doing here today. Our children's children are going to have a better world.
Great. Susan, I didn't forget you.
I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, but what he just said is what I was thinking. I have two grandchildren, one in kindergarten and one in 4th grade, and they go to Gibsonville Elementary School, and they don't know that there was a time when only white kids went together. They don't know that there's only a time when the rich people had one school, even the whites were segregated by their property taxes. So because everybody's there, I keep saying everybody's there, and I mean Muslims are there, right? They're immigrants, they're black, they're white. I mean, all these kind of things we call people by, they're all in that classroom and with the teachers. And if you can't find hope in that, that's part of the dream, right? My children. And so my grandchildren can do that. I couldn't do that. I didn't have the opportunity until I got to Women's College, it was called in those days, to have Black next door neighbors. And it was in a residence hall on Greensboro, Women's College. But they have that now, and that has to be optimistic. I agree with the first speaker, and thank you for this evening. I have listened. Please tell that man I have enjoyed listening to this so much, and I have learned so much from these people, all of us. Thank you so much, and I'm going to go on the road with them, though.
Okay, good. So we've learned a lot listening from you.
Thank you so much, Mary.
So much. Speech, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, the optimism that I see is that all power is in the people. And if people recognize that they have power, then it's simpler than we think. And things happen before we know it. I remember a time when nobody thought we'd have a Black president during our lifetime. We've now had one and have now a Black woman Black vice president. The point is, things can happen with people power. Help people to understand what their power is, and things can change quicker than we think.
Great. Bill?
I just have to second what Alvin and Susan said. What gives me hope is young people. I mean, I hate to put it this way, but I think we're going to have to, a lot of old racists are going to have to die off, frankly, before we can really truly solve this problem. But I'm very optimistic about the younger generation, and I think we can look to them for leadership on this.
Ray?
I have to echo my brother speak. I think it's what gives me hope is like I said earlier, I think folks are starting to see the power of their clenched fists, that we are not in a violent way, but that collectively we can do so much more together. And in this democracy, it works only when we make it work by showing up, and not just on election day, but holding accountable Republicans and Democrats, giving nobody a pass, saying that they want a system that works for all of us and not just some of us. And I think that is happening in a way that hadn't before. I think you're seeing people who understand that at the end of the day, it's folks out of power being folks with the power. We're the ones with the power, and we cannot let folks outside rule us. So I think that's what's giving me hope right now.
Ray, I should have been calling you Reverend all evening because you've been preaching to us.
No, you're fine.
Thank you for that. So Frederick, if you could wrap us up with that question and also give us a little thoughts on what you're working on now in your next project, but tell us what gives you hope.
What gives me hope, and I'm gonna have to put a plug in there. I'm on the board for the James K. Polk site here in Pineville, and historic sites, museums. The old guard has been changing in these specific institutions, and they're being very intentional about being more inclusive. And when you look back in history, at least from what I've studied with regards to movements, it's the youth, it's the kids. When I look back in the 60s, you know, when you look at Birmingham, it was over 500 kids that were put in jail, right? And in multiple other movements. John Lewis, he was here in Rock Hill when he first, when blood was first drew on his body in fighting for the rights of others, was here. And he was a young man. He was like, I want to say 19, 20 some odd years old. He was a young man. So with this group, with the youth that we have now growing up in a society that's way more eclectic than what it was back then, they're going to be the change agents going forward with regards to what a more harmonious society looks like. And I am very optimistic about that. As far as other projects that I have coming up, I'm working on, I have two projects in production. One is focused on the lives of Afro-Indigenous individuals, telling those specific perspectives, and that will be, we'll be shooting here. Well, we've already started shooting here in North Carolina, so we'll be between here, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, and a couple other places. And then I just wrapped up a short film, a short documentary with one of the descendants of the Clotilda, which was the last slave ship to come in 1860 down in Mobile, Alabama. So those are my current projects, and one other one that's going to be focused on the rice culture down in the Lower Cape Fear region. So I'll be working on that project as well. So that's what I got coming up.
Yeah, we'll be looking forward to all of those. I can't wait. And I mean, I am optimistic. I do have to refer to some things Ray said. You know, John Lewis, we talk about him. And he, of course, as a young man, got his head cracked open, you know, trying to fight for the right to vote. And he lived long enough to be a congressman to still be fighting for voting rights as folks were trying to push back on them. With progress always comes pushback, as my son, the historian, likes to say. So there always has to be that activism and that fight and that consciousness, and having those conversations that may be tough, and also learning the truth and learning history. So I want to thank all of our panelists tonight. Thank Frederick Murphy for his wonderful film. Please, everyone, seek it out. And I think there's some links that have been provided in the chat. You shared your time and your wisdom. I've learned so much. And we know that the issues that Frederick Murphy raises in his films are still with us. They have always been with us. And make no mistake, we are all into this life together. We rise together and we fall together. So take all of the words of our panelists to heart, and I would love to take this show on the road. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. We tried to get to as many questions as we could. I think we got to quite a few. Thanks for joining our discussion on race and reconciliation and our look at Frederick Murphy's documentary, The Other Side of the Coin. Thanks to all our guests, musician, speech, Mr. Murphy, journalist and author Bill Sizemore, student activist and terrific person, Susan Marshall, Reverend Ray Mckinnon, and photojournalist Alvin C. Jacobs. Look up his work as well. And if you'd like more information about our special events here at WFAE, please go to WFAE.org. Good night, everyone.